All right, so for today's discussion, we're going to be covering the rent versus own. And the rent versus own, if you're not aware of it, rent versus own is available on the client side only. It's not a partner report. So this was one that you would deliver directly to a client, or you could build it as a marketing report. So for today's discussion, I'm going to go ahead and build it as a marketing report. So what I've done is I hit the new client button up at the top here, and then I'm going to tag it for marketing. Now what this does is two things. It removes sensitive borrower data. So for instance, the last name is gone, middle name's gone, but it also removes from the contact area the property address. So you won't see the property address on your presentation when you do select a marketing report. So just keep that in mind. There's no need to fill this part in if you select marketing. So let's give it a headline. I'm going to call it renting versus owning. And for the friendly name, since I'm doing this as a marketing report, not terribly important because I'm kind of using a friendly name for my report headline anyway, but it's always a good idea to get in the habit of using friendly names in case you do multiple presentations for a single borrower. So I'm just going to call this one RVO 829. Now, one thing I do want to draw your attention to, this question here, does he or she rent or own? If we select own, we're not going to be guided through the rent versus own presentation. So we always have to select rent if we want to be able to do one of these. Now that said, when you select rent, Edge automatically tries to guide you through it, which means that when you get to the analysis screen, you're going to see the rent analysis summary. This is a little bit different from the regular analysis summary you would see if you're doing a total cost analysis. So let's get back to our first screen. We've selected rent. We've given it a friendly name. Now in the next screen, we're just going to choose a goal. And let's say that this is a first-time home buyer. Now, one thing to keep in mind is you've got a notes section here on the lower right corner of your screen that'll follow you all the way through the affordability section. So if you want to take notes on what your client is talking about, make sure and leave them here. This is definitely the best place. If you're going to use Edge as your actual application tool, definitely want to keep your notes here. One thing that you should note is you can actually leave quite a bit of notes here. I want to say I've gotten it up to 100 lines of text, so feel free to be as verbose as you like on your notes. Keep track of everything that you're talking with your client on. So now we get to the assumptions, and these are pretty straightforward. Let's say they're paying $1,500 for their rent. The annual increase, keep in mind here, when we're looking at the long-term rent over time, and which we will over in the analysis screen, if you have a rent increase, this is going to increase your rent every year by the percentage that you indicate here. So if you're looking at the 60-month analysis and expecting to see $1,500 times 60, it's not going to happen. Every year it's going to increase by that 3% or whatever you use in here. So you'll have a little bit different value in that field. So just make sure to keep that in mind if your client asks you about it. Now, I do suggest a 3% annual rent increase. That's pretty common, pretty universal. But feel free to use whatever percentage you'd like to. Now, if they do have rental insurance, you can put that in here as well. And any other monthly rent expense that you'd like to apply here. Oftentimes people will put in several different other kinds of expenses. Feel free to put whatever you want in here. It's a good way to compare against home ownership. If there's additional expenses that they have to spend just because they're a renter versus what they wouldn't have to spend as a homeowner, that's what this field is for. Now, standard deduction, I'm going to tell you right now, stay away from this field. Do not use this field for the moment. What this does is this allows you to apply the standard deduction to the rent side. So it will actually show a tax benefit on the rental side. Now, the reason I tell you to stay away from it for right now is that it's not an accurate comparison to the home ownership side. On the rent side, everybody gets a standard deduction whether they rent or not, so they're just going to be taking that deduction. On the home ownership side, we're only showing the actual tax benefit they're getting off the mortgage, so we're not including all the other things they could potentially write off, and it becomes kind of a lopsided equation. So my advice for now, stay away from the standard deduction until we can iron out a way to kind of flatten this out for you and make it more of an accurate comparison. Now the affordability section, this becomes pretty important in the rent versus own, where it's not as important when you're doing a total cost analysis, but a lot of these fields you're going to use to help pre-qualify. You're also going to use them to develop long-term net worth. So let's input our income. Let's say you make 75, and credit status we'll say is good. He's got $15,000 of non-mortgage debt, which is about a $700 monthly payment. Now, these figures that I just entered, all three of them, are going to help generate the debt-to-income ratios that you see when you get to the product screens. So keep your eye on that. If you notice that the debt to income ratio is way too high, obviously you want to look for an alternative, find out if they can pay down some debt before they do the purchase so that they can get their DTI ratio into a qualifying position. Now, savings balance, this one is actually very important on the rent versus own, because what happens is we have to assume they have at least enough to make the down payment. So I'm going to go ahead and put in, let's say, $20,000, and they're getting a rate of return of 0.25%. Now, what's going to happen is at the end of the presentation, when we get to the analysis screen, you're going to find that Edge is actually going to subtract the total cash to close from their savings balance, and it's going to give them a new adjusted savings balance. It's going to continue accruing at that 0.25% going forward over time. Now, if you don't enter anything in the savings balance field, that's okay. You may not know what the savings balance is, but I would tell you for case studies, always make sure to indicate a savings balance that's at least enough to cover the down payments of the products that you're offering. This will make more sense when I show you what it looks like over the analysis screen. Now, tax bracket, pretty important here. Because we do show the tax benefit, we want to make sure to include the tax bracket for your borrower. So generally, you can find the tax bracket here by hitting the button, Find Tax Bracket. It'll take you over to the IRS site, enter a couple of pieces of information, and it'll tell you exactly what bracket this person's in. This guy would probably be in about the 25% bracket. Notice that I'm not entering this in the form of a decimal. This is a percentage. So keep this in mind. Now, the other part that we've recently just added is additional tax credits. So when you hit this button, it actually pulls up a screen for the MCC tax credit. Now, the MCC is a mortgage credit certificate, and you'll need to consult your lender to find out if you're able to offer this. But it's state-specific, so it's different guidelines for each state. But it allows the first-time home borrower, the first-time home buyer, to write off a certain percentage of the interest that they're paying on the mortgage every year up to a cap. So, for instance, in California, they can write off up to 30% of the annual interest, and the cap for that credit is $2,000. So if 30% is more than $2,000, Edge will only apply $2,000 to that credit. Now, these figures, when you enter them here, these credits actually appear in the tax benefit line for home ownership. So when you're looking and trying to determine what the tax benefit is over on the home ownership side, there's a few factors that come into play. And I'll go into more detail when we get over to the actual presentation. But the parts that actually affect the tax benefit are the interest that they're paying every year, the mortgage insurance that they're paying every year, the property tax, and the MCC tax credit if you've got it in here. If you don't enter anything in here, it's fine. It won't apply anything for an MCC tax credit, so don't worry about it. You can always skip it if you're not able to offer it, or if you just don't want to show that for the presentation. Now, the second part of the affordability section is just asking for their minimums and maximums. Again, this is part of that. If you're using the Edge as a presentation tool or as an application tool, you're going to collect this information from your borrower anyway. It's a good idea to have a repository so you can always refer back to it just in case, for some reason you quoted them at a $250,000 house. They can't quite qualify, but their price range said $230,000 to $250,000. So maybe we talk about a $230,000 house. So just something to keep in mind. It's just an additional notes section for you. So now we get into new products, and these are basically the same across any presentation you do in Edge. So whether you're on the open house flyer, a seller buy down, or a total cost, or a rent versus own, the product data entry is always going to be the same. So let's put in a couple of products. I'm going to do a 30-year FHA first, and then I'll compare it versus a conventional. Now, if you've saved product templates, this is going to save you a lot of time on your data entry. You can save a product template that actually completes all three screens of your product. So meaning the base loan details here, the closing costs can be saved as part of the template, and the monthly escrows can be saved as part of the template. So if you haven't got these saved, it's really easy to save them actually. When you get to the end of a product, you can always save it as a template, and now that's available for any future presentation that you're doing. So if you're constantly doing an FHA 3.5% down, I would advise you save it as a product template so that you have everything already pre-populated for yourself, and you can just pull it in one shot, make alterations to the rate, any closing costs that needed to be altered. But that's pretty much it. You won't have to change much else, and you can go straight along to the next product. For this case, I'm going to go ahead and do the manual data entry, and then at the end I'm going to save it as a product template so you can see what it looks like. Now, this is an FHA loan, so I need to make sure and select yes for FHA. Now, what this does is in the next screen, it's going to open up the upfront MIP field for me. If I select no here, I won't have that field. So make sure to select yes for all FHA loans. My purchase price, let's say it's $250. And for my down payment, I'm going to go with the 3.5% down. Let's say I can get them about a 4.5% rate right now on a 30-year term. Now, closing costs, you have the option of inputting these as ballpark figures, meaning, I'm estimating $2,500 in APR costs, $1,000 in prepaids, $1,000 in non-APR costs, something like that, and that's perfectly acceptable. Remember, this is all pre-GFE, and in fact, this one's just a marketing presentation. So the idea behind this is you don't have any sensitive borrower information. Matter of fact, you don't even know for a fact what they make or if they can qualify for this loan. So keep in mind, all pre-GFE. It's okay to ballpark these if you want to. I will tell you it's a lot faster if you do an itemized template and just pull in the template. I'll show you what that looks like real quick. So once you've got your template saved, and you can see I've got a bunch of them in here, you can select the appropriate one and pull it in. And then it really minimizes a lot of the data entry. I mean, you're probably going to have to do things like alter the hazard insurance reserves and the tax reserves because they're going to vary depending on the loan size and the loan value. If there's, if you need to make any contribution changes or anything like that, you'd want to change it as well. But notice that by pulling in this template, all my fees are already listed. I don't have to mess with this. I just really only have to alter a couple of figures and I'm ready to roll. And once you're done with it, apply it to the loan. And you can see that it automatically grays out the fields that are affected by what you did in the closing cost detail. If you need to make any alterations to these fields, you'll have to go back inside the closing cost detail and alter the specific field for it. Now notice that the points in the prepaid interest days are still editable at this time, and the reason for this is these really don't have any effect on the other fees. So the reason we put them out here is if you choose to finance some of the fees in on, say, a refinance, you'd want the points to apply to the total amount financed, so we leave them on the outside here so that Edge knows what to apply those points against. Same thing on the prepaid interest days. This applies to the total amount financed. Now last part here, I need to make sure and enter my upfront MIP. And notice that you can toggle between dollar amount and percentage by clicking on this button here in the middle. And as soon as you tab off that field, it actually opens up a checkbox here that allows you to apply this to the loan. So this will tack the upfront MIP on top of the loan amount, so it increases their amount financed. Now the last part is monthly escrows. I like using factors for these. There's really no reason to try and isolate it down to the dollar. And then we need to get our mortgage insurance in there. And for the high LTV FHA loans, we need a 1.35 factor. And there's a couple of things that you need to pay attention to. Is on FHA loans, they do recalculate the mortgage insurance payment every year based on the balance. So we do want to check this box. And this is only for FHA loans. Conventional MI doesn't usually do this. And then probably the most important part is for the high LTV FHA loans, the mortgage insurance has to carry for the life of the loan. So I'm using 360 as my MI cutoff month, which means my MI cutoff percentage really doesn't ever come into play. I can leave it in there, it doesn't hurt anything, but this is really going to be the operator for this MI. Now, the last part is if you want to include the MI in the tax benefit equation, check the box here. That will include it. It is still tax deductible for right now. They've talked about pulling that out and then talked about putting it back in. For now, it's still tax deductible, so feel free to check this box. Now, the last part, before I move on to another product here, I'm going to save this entire product as a template. So I'll hit Save as Template. I'm going to call it 30-year FHA, 3.5% down, and hit OK. Now, what this means is that when I go to add another product on any presentation, not just this one, I can hit this drop-down box and I can choose my FHA 3.5% purchase. And all I have to do is put in my purchase price and it automatically fills everything out for me. So the only thing that I need to do are adjust the rate. If I had any adjustments that I needed to make on the closing costs, I'd want to do that. Any adjustments on the upfront MIP, I'd want to do it. You can see it brought in all my escrows, so I don't have to worry about that. But this one's going to be a conventional. So I'm actually going to start over from the beginning here. And let's rename this. This one's going to be called 30-year 5%. And I just made a cardinal mistake, guys. I left my phone going while I'm trying to record. So for those of you who are doing video presentations, remember to always turn down the volume on your phone or it destroys your video like it's destroying my recording right now. So hopefully that helps you out, guys. All right, so 30%, 5%, I'm sorry, 30-year 5% down. This is going to be a conventional, so I'll even label it conventional. I'm going to toggle the FHA question to no, and I've already got the correct purchase price in there, so I'm just going to put in my down payment percentage. I'm going to put the interest rate I can get on that. And the term is right, so I don't really need to do anything there. Now I do need to pull in the appropriate closing cost detail. If it's a little bit different from my FHA closing costs, I'd want to make sure and pull in the right one. So let's, it's probably going to be the same as my conventional 10%. So I'll bring in my fees. And you can see I really don't need to make a whole lot of edits here. I do need my hazard and tax reserves. So let's see, there's my hazard reserves. Let's say it's about 400. I need to probably enter another line. I'm going to hit add fee here and choose my tax reserves. Say that's about 600. And then I'm going to hit apply to loan. Now, the next part here, I'm just going to hit the right arrow. Remember, the right and left arrows trigger saves inside Edge, so keep that in mind. Anytime you need to save data, just remember that these guys are what triggers the save. If you ever hit one of these arrows and you find that you get an hourglass or a spinner for a really long time, that means it's actually not able to get to our Edge server for some reason to process that save. So hang tight. If it does that, just hang on for a second, wait for that to go away just to ensure a save, and then continue on. It could be a result of maybe a spotty internet connection. It could be, the Wi-Fi is just kind of cutting out a little bit. But either way, if you ever notice that you try and save a report, you go to view the presentation and there's a duplicate product in there, that happens because a save has been missed. And then when Edge tries to save it again, it saves a duplicate product. So keep it in mind, if you do hit this and you get a spinner that lasts a long time, just hang tight for a second, wait for it to go away, and then continue on in your presentation and you should be fine. All right, so my escrows here for my conventional, I'm still at 95%, so I am going to need MI, but it's not going to be that 1.35 factor. It's probably going to be the 0.9 or maybe 1.2, depending on which carrier I go with. Now, for conventional loans, we do want to have a 78% MI cutoff, and we don't want the MI to recalculate every year on the balance. It's going to be that MI's payment is going to stay true for the entire loan. Now, lastly, we need to remove the MI cutoff month. We don't want this to run for the entire life of the loan. We only want it to run until that 78% mark is reached. This is tax deductible, so I'm going to go ahead and check the box there. And if I want to add another product, I can do so at this point. For this presentation, I'm just going to put 2 products in here, and then we're going to go into explaining how that affects the rent versus own presentation. I see there's a couple of questions, so before we get there, let me make sure I address those. Glenn's question, in the closing cost details, I always notice none of the title-related costs, title policy, exam search, etc. Do we add the fields? Yes, absolutely. So if you have additional fields that are not represented in this drop-down list, let me get back into the closing cost detail real quick. If you have fields that are not represented in this drop-down list here, feel free to add a custom field. You only need to do it once, and once you do it, it will start appearing in the drop-down list for you. And you can see all the custom ones at the bottom. So you can see I've got custom ones entered in here. I've got 1-year hazard, custom fee. I've got a debt payoff one that I've used for doing debt consolidations. And you can see I've duplicated quite a few of them actually just in doing these Q&A sessions. But if you ever find that there's a fee that's not represented in here, the way to create a custom is just hit add custom fee. It's going to ask you what to call it and what it should be based on. It'll ask you if you want to default it to be a prepaid escrow, and if you want to default it to be an APR fee. Now naturally, if you check the APR box, you can't check the prepaid escrow field because those are always non-APR. So once you've got it in there and you've got all the details, you hit OK, it's going to actually set that fee up for you, and it will be in your drop-down list to select for future. Reagan's question, on the closing cost details, can I reorder the list? I get the question a lot actually, and I understand exactly how that would be very useful. It's not possible right now. The only way you could do it would be literally to delete the line items and then re-enter them. So sorry about that. We do have a ticket to see if we can get that available for you. So it may be coming down the line in the future. It's not been approved for development yet, but we are aware that there are quite a few people asking for that. Holly's question, she says, why are you using 80%, or why are you not using 80% rather than 78 for the MI cutoff? Great question. So for most MI companies, and I'll say that with definitely FHA and Radian and a couple of the major other MI companies, they can apply to get the MI cut off at 80%, but they have to apply for it. It's not automatic. At 78%, it becomes automatic. So you can use 80%. It's perfectly valid. Just make sure that your borrower knows that once that hits 80%, or make sure you've got a reminder, once that hits 80%, they need to apply to have that mortgage insurance dropped. So I always use 78% because I don't want to have to rely on the borrower remembering in 128 months to call the mortgage insurance company and say, hey, look, I'm at 78 now, or I'm at 80 now. So I always use 78. It just seems to be a better option. And as long as you keep it uniform across your presentation, either one will work perfectly fine. All right, let's see. Dennis's question, can you add an option button for the seller to pay the points and prepaid interest days instead of manually inputting under the closing cost detail? Dennis, that's a great option. I like that. Can you fire that over to support@mortgagecoach.com in the form of an email? I'll make sure and get that included on our ticket list, and we'll see if we can get that done for you. I know that we allow everything else to be seller paid, so it totally makes sense that you'd want to cover those fees. So if you could send this over to us in an email, I would definitely appreciate it. I'll get that in there. And Michael's question, yes, in fact, that was the power-up sound from Super Mario Brothers that was coming over my phone. Justice question, what about the sales concessions from the seller so they show as a contributions field? Okay, so there's two different ways to do contributions here in Edge. One, and actually there's three. It depends on what you're going to use it for. So for instance, if one of these fees that I already have listed is going to be paid by the seller, let's say they're going to, for some reason, cover the recording fees. I know this is not normal, but let's say they're going to do that. I can hit seller here, and that means that the seller will cover this fee. So you notice it also dropped the borrower paid amount by $100 once I adjusted that to be a seller paid fee. Now this is not going to show necessarily, it's not going to knock down the cash to close. So what it does is it actually just makes it so this fee is it's no longer a responsibility of the borrower. Now, if you're doing a contribution, here are the two ways that you can do it. One, you can add a fee, and we actually have a line item in here called contribution. So if you hit C in the drop-down and then select contribution, this field knows, it has logic tied into it that says whatever money you put in here is going to knock down the cash to close by that amount. If you just tag one of these as a lender paid, it just means the lender is responsible for that fee. So it's not necessarily going to do what you think it's going to do, which is apply a credit against everything. It's just crediting against that one fee. So if I was to input, let's say, a $2,000 lender credit right here, you notice my borrower paid fees are $42.70 right now. Once I tab off that field, my borrower paid fees have gone to $22.70, and my lender paid has now gone to $2,000. So that lender paid is doing a contribution against the closing costs. Now, you have the option of choosing where you want to apply this contribution. For instance, you can apply it to the APR fees by checking the APR box. You can apply it to the prepaids by checking the prepaid escrow box. You can actually even finance this in. Now, this is pretty cool. This is something we just came out with not too long ago. When you have, let's say you've chosen to finance every single fee in there, and this is for refinances, of course. You've chosen to finance every single fee into the loan amount, and you want to finance in a contribution to actually drop the total amount financed, you can now do that. So if you checked all the boxes here, it's going to be a zero cash to close on a refi because all of these other fees will be financed in, and then the contribution will be financed in, literally dropping the amount financed by this amount. Now, the other way you can do a contribution is if you have something custom, meaning you don't want to use our contribution line item, you can add a custom fee and call it whatever you want. And I've added a couple of these already, so I'm going to pull one of my custom fees up. But let's go down to the bottom of my list here and say I've got a lender credit fee that I've created. Now, if you're going to do a custom fee, it doesn't have the logic built in that knows it should actually reduce the cash to close by this amount. It just knows that this fee has to be paid by the lender if you check it lender. So what I'm going to do is I'm creating a custom fee. I'm making it a negative $2,000, and I'm leaving it as borrower paid. Now, you see what it did here. It actually reduced the borrower paid to $270.50. But notice the lender paid doesn't adjust here. So this is the trade-off you get for doing a custom line item rather than just using the contribution field, is it doesn't know that this is actually a seller contribution. It's just subtracting this from the borrower fees. Let me get rid of these line items because it's going to make kind of a weird comparison. And let's see if there's any more questions I can tackle before we move along. So Glenn, hopefully that covered your question on the lender credit. Let me know if you need a little bit more on that one. Jim's question, if you're doing this as a general presentation for a mass mailing for a realtor partner who manages rental properties, is there a way to include their name, picture, and logo on the presentation? Not currently, Jim. The rent versus own cannot currently be, it can't be co-branded. However, what I will tell you is you probably want to check out the presentation we did a couple of weeks ago on the realtor presentation packet. Basically, it goes over how to do an open house flyer and couple it with any other report in Edge so that you get both sides of the equation. So for instance, you would do, say, an open house flyer. That's co-branded, and you'd have an introductory video to the realtor. But when you do that, you're also going to create a secondary report. It's going to be a borrower-facing marketing report. And in that report, you're going to cross-sell the realtor in the video. So you won't have the co-branding on the presentation for the rent versus own that you do, but it will be on the initial open house flyer. So you can get 75% coverage on it, and it actually leads you into a good way of not only introducing yourself to the realtor, but following up with a presentation and showing them some of the tools that are facing borrowers. So not only you're showing them how you can court them, but you're showing them how you actually educate the borrowers with this type of information. And Justice, when you use the contribution line, the actual one labeled contribution, it will affect the cash to close. It will actually reduce it. If you use a custom fee and you rename it something, just make sure to make it a negative borrower paid fee, and it will reduce the cash to close on that as well. Michael's question, is there any way to make the prepaid interest appear in the closing cost detail without just adding a custom fee and typing the amount so you can deem it under seller, lender, borrower paid? It kind of goes along to the question we had earlier about getting a checkbox here to indicate who's paying for it. What happens is when you indicate the prepaid interest days here and you go into the closing cost detail, I'm just going to save that change real quick. It does appear, it's not going to appear as a line item, but it does appear at the very bottom of the detail. So you can see that we've got prepaid interest days right here of 15 days, and the amount is right here. Now that amount is also factored into this number here. So the total borrower paid fees do include the prepaid interest, but I understand what you're asking. You need the ability to make this paid by a different party. So I think it's a great idea. Once we get that ticket over in our system, I'll make sure and get it in there so our developers can take a look, and hopefully we can get it out on one of the next releases of Edge. All right, so let's get, let me cancel out of there. All right, cool. So it looks like we've got all the questions taken care of for right now, so we'll move forward in this report. We'll get to our analysis screen. Okay, so in the analysis screen, we've got a couple of things that you need to be aware of. Probably the most important, and the one you're going to get the most questions about, but it's a great question to have to answer, is what in the world are these payments representing? Now, obviously the monthly rent payment is $1,525, but this is not the pity payment for the loan that we entered. This is actually a net monthly payment. Now, the net monthly payment on your new home ownership options are the PITI payment minus the tax benefit and the principal paid. Now the reason we do it that way is we're trying to isolate just the negative part of all these payments. So the unrecoverable costs for each method here. As a renter, all of it's unrecoverable. So there's nothing that they're going to get back on this. On the home ownership side, they're reaping a tax benefit, and the principal that they're paying, they're actually retaining in the form of equity. So we're not viewing those as costs. We're only looking at the interest, the MI, taxes, and insurance as actual costs for these loans. Now I'll explain that again when we get over to the actual presentation screen so I can show you the numbers that actually generate that. But I want you to be aware that these are not pity payments. So if you're doing a total cost analysis, the comparison is definitely between pity payments. But in this case, we're comparing net payments between each scenario. All right, so let's start at the top here. Property appreciation rate, pretty self-explanatory. Whatever rate you use here is what the property value is going to appreciate at every year. So if it's up to you in terms of what you'd like to use for the appreciation rate. I would indicate a 3% rate. especially since I'm using a 3% increase on the rent anyway, kind of make them apples to apples. Now the analysis months and the long-term years, just remember that this middle one is months and the long-term is years. So the reason we did the middle one in months is so you can isolate break-even points on the total cost analysis. For the rent versus own, really not going to find much of a break-even point. You've already broken even on the rent as soon as you take out your loan. So we don't have to worry about that, but it does give you the option of isolating whichever month in the future that you'd like to look at. Long-term years, it's up to you in terms of how long you want to show these. I like to adjust these after the borrower has already seen it. So for instance, if I was to put out a presentation to my borrower and it's a rent versus own, I may start with total interest in MI paid over a 15-year span, because I think this is probably the most valuable metric for a client to be able to see is, look, you're going to throw away $340,000 in rent over a 15-year period of time. And with these new products, the unrecoverable part is still only $187. So these are the real costs of doing the loan. Again, they're retaining the principal in the form of equity, and they're getting a tax benefit on this as well. So the parts that they're not getting back, really just the interest. So these new ones, obviously, they're a far less cost than what we're looking at on the rent side. So I would start with this one. But when I've got my borrower on the phone and he's actually viewing the presentation, I can come back here inside Edge and change my metric. Let's look at something else. And as soon as I hit one of these right or left arrows, it's going to trigger a save, which means that the live report that the borrower is viewing is also going to be updated in real time, literally 3 to 5 seconds max before it gets updated on their screen. Now what this allows you to do is you're not set with a static presentation with your borrower. You can change any figure in Edge, you can change any metric for the analysis in Edge, and as soon as you hit one of those save buttons, it's going to change on that live report for your borrower. So it's going to help you to guide the conversation that you're having towards the education part that you want to deliver. Now, same thing on the short term here. You can start with whichever metric you'd like. Rent versus tax benefit is usually a pretty common one that I see. If you don't want to compare the rent against tax benefit, a negative versus a positive, we've given you the tax benefit analysis area, which just says, look, there's no tax benefit on the rent, but on the home ownership side, you're going to get this amount of tax benefit. This is part of the reason I told you not to use the standard deduction field. If we were to use that standard deduction and they get a standard deduction of $6,000 a year, whether they own a house or not, $6,000 over 60 months, it's going to be greater than what we're getting for our just our mortgage write-off. So that's why I don't think it's an accurate equation. Stay away from that standard deduction for right now. I do like showing this analysis, however, because tax benefit as a renter, really it's zero for renting. There used to be rental credits that they could get. I know that in our state we don't get those anymore. So now it's just you're looking at, you get a benefit as a homeowner, you don't as a renter. Now, another part I do want to draw your attention to is the analysis of the reinvestment strategy. This is actually, even if you don't do a reinvestment, you should be aware of what the screen is showing because your borrower can see this. And they see it in form of the net worth. So if we're looking at both of these programs, and we're not showing rent in any column here because we're just comparing the new products for reinvestments, you can see where our MI cuts off. On the conventional loan, it's cutting off at month 113 instead of the life of the loan like the FHA is. So we could potentially reinvest that MI after drop-off. And especially in this case, I'm probably going to recommend they put it straight back into their savings. And what you can do is if you double-click on any of these data entry fields, meaning the reduction payment, the savings payment, or the investment payment, basically any ones that are outlined in blue, if you double-click on them, you can customize when this payment's going to hit. So if I double-click on it, you can see that my last MI payment is $178.13, and my MI cuts off at 113, which means at month 114, I've got an extra $178 that I can put straight back into their savings account. Now, if I do nothing else right now, it assumes at month 114, this amount is going to go back into their savings account every month going forward. So whatever metric you choose, if you choose 50 years out, it's going to assume this 178. It's going to start at month 114. It's going to continue through that 50-year stretch. So keep it in mind, you can cut this off if you need to. Say, for instance, you wanted to do a lump sum payment. You know that for a fact that in 2 years they're coming into about $10,000. So at month 25, I want to indicate a $10,000 payment to their savings. Now, it's only going to be a one-time payment, so I need to add one more line item at month 26 and keep it as 0. So that's how you do a lump sum here in Edge. And you can do that on term reductions, you can do it in the savings, and you can do it in the reinvestment screen. For this one, I'm just going to do the MI reinvestment, so I'll do it at month 113, and that was 178.13 was the MI. Now when you customize it, it'll say custom here. You can always adjust this by double-clicking on it again. Now I will tell you that the reason we don't see the savings yet here is because it hasn't been saved. Remember, the right and left arrows are my save functions. So I'm going to hit OK real quick. I'm going to trigger a save, and then I'm going to go right back to that analysis screen because I want to see what that figure actually is. Okay, and actually it looks like it's not going to save it until I get farther in, but we'll take care of that in a moment. Now, one thing I do want to draw your attention to is, remember I said you got to start with a savings balance that's at least enough to cover the cash to close. The whole reason is because that cash to close gets subtracted from the savings balance and gives you an adjusted savings start, as you can see here. So basically their savings account stays the same. They've just lost the money for the cash to close there, but what's left is going to continue accruing. This is a great way to account for the difference in down payments on the different loan programs. Say you're comparing, a 5% versus a 20% down. There's a significant difference in the amount of money that they still have in the bank after close. So we need to make sure and account for that. Now in this case, because we did a 5% conventional, they only have $2,700 left in that account after they close. And that's going to continue growing at 0.25%. But then when we get out to month, I think it was 113 where this starts. At month 113, that customized schedule is going to kick in, and it's going to start putting that payment back into their current savings account. Now, they're also saving $115 versus this FHA loan, so if we really wanted to be technical about this, we would actually start this at month 1, and we would put in $115.97. Then, at month 113, when our MI drops off, we have that $115.97 and we have the $178.13 that we can reinvest. And as much as I am a numbers guy, I need to break a calculator open for this. And it looks like it's hiding behind my screen. There it is. Okay, so I'm going to take my 178.13 plus 115.97. So at month 113, relative to the FHA loan, they'll have $294 and a dime. So I'm going to put that in there. And that's going to continue on for the remaining life of the loan. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK there. Now you can do this in the reinvestment area too. You don't have to do it in the savings. I like doing it in the savings if you're not going to suggest a new investment vehicle. However, if you're working with a CPA or financial planner, this is actually a great way to show them not to use their current savings and to actually advise a new investment that they can get a higher rate of return on. Now, another thing I want to draw your attention to is there's a new box down here at the bottom, pay off first with accumulation. Now, what this means is if you check this box, and we will never have enough in the accumulated account to pay off the remaining note of the mortgage, but if we did a huge payment, and I'm going to lop these out of here just so you can see what it looks like. Let's say that this was a $500 a month payment. Now, if we do that and check the box here, it's actually, once I save it, it's going to reduce the freedom point. So it's going to say that as soon as that borrower has enough money in their investment account to pay off the remaining note of the mortgage, it's going to pay it off, which means their freedom point gets adjusted down to something like 23 years in this case. So you can use it for a marketing report. It may not be necessary to go into all the detail that I've been showing you today. I just wanted to show you all the different possibilities that you have using these. But in this case, let's lop that out of there. And let's go to the next screen here. Now you've got basic contact information. Remember, because this is a marketing report, you don't need to put anything for the property address field. Definitely want to record their contact information, however, just in case you need to email them later and such. And then the last part here is you select which presentation you're going to show. Now by default, because we chose rent, it's going to show rent versus own. Now when we show rent versus own, and we'll see the presentation in just a moment, you have different areas where you can enter things like payment notes, just like you can on the total cost. So make sure that you indicate any kind of compliance verbiage that you need regarding the payment. In this case, since it's a rent versus own, I'm going to put net payments shown are PITI minus tax benefit and principal paid. Now there's also sidebar text that accompanies each one of these. You could probably put that net monthly payments verbiage in here, and it would be a correct place to put it. The double asterisks are actually tied to the pity payment. So technically, if I was going to put payment notes in here, I'd want to do it on what the pity payment is. I'd want to say that it includes taxes and insurance, or it doesn't include it if you don't choose to use those. But completely up to you. It's at your discretion on what you'd like to put here. I'll show you on the presentation where it shows up, though. Now you have another chance here to change the metrics that you're looking at. So for instance, if you wanted to choose a different one or a different amount of months or years, you could do that in these screens. And then last part, make sure and select a quote date. It'll try and default to today's date once you pop open the little calendar. But if you don't enter one, just remember it's a marketing report and you've got a rate out there. So you want to make sure that you've tied your rate to a date so nobody can come back at you and say, well, you quoted 3.5. Well, that was 6 months ago. You know, obviously we can't get rates like that anymore. So make sure you get a quote date in there. It's definitely going to help you for compliance reasons. Then choose the email link. And I always recommend previewing your report before you send it out. So hit the preview button. Okay, so here's what we're looking at. Now you can see this is where that payment notes text comes out, and you can see that the double asterisks that correspond to it are up here on the total payment. So I probably would have wanted to indicate that this payment includes taxes and insurance. I think that's all I would really need there. And then the net payment verbiage that I have right here, I probably want to put it under the more info section here. So this verbiage right here can be altered back in the presentation screens. That's probably where I'd want to explain exactly what those net payments are. All right, so the easiest way to show your borrower what these net payments are is to show them the itemization right here. We have the total payment of $1,849, and that's, again, the pity payment. We have a tax benefit of $530. Remember, that's comprised of the MI, the interest, any tax credit that you have, and the property tax. And then, of course, they're multiplied, with the exception of the credit, they're multiplied times the tax bracket that you enter in order to find out what that benefit would be. Now, the same thing applies in the long term when you're looking at the tax benefit analysis. It's not just taking the monthly tax benefit and multiplying it by 60. It's actually isolating the 60-year figures for the interest, the MI, multiplying them out and finding what the correct figure would be for that. So to get our net payment, we take our $1,849, we subtract our $530 tax benefit, and we subtract the $323 principal paid there. That's where we get our net payment. And this is the easiest way to show the borrower. In fact, I see a lot of reports come across my desk where people have already just left this highlighted so that when the borrower sees it, they can understand exactly where these are coming from. But of course, you also want to put a video on here so that you can explain in more detail exactly what's going on. And remember, it's a marketing report, so you're trying to hit on some very basic points, but I would definitely hit on what the net payments are, just so that they understand what it is, and then give them a call to action at the end so that you can talk about all their financing options and discover other potential that might be available for them. Now, the net worth. If we look at this, you can see that we've got our total payments here. We've got our principal paid and our tax benefit, and then we get our net cost here. Now, that's a very valid item to show because remember, we're taking that total payment, we're subtracting these figures out to get a net cost. So just like when we were looking at the net monthly payment, our 15-year analysis, we're doing the same thing over the long term. So your real net cost for renting is that $340 that you're paying versus the $156 that you're paying for the unrecoverable parts of these new loans. All right, so it looks like there's a couple of questions in here. Oh, Holly's question, would you remind us how to highlight? Absolutely. So anytime you want to highlight on one of your reports, you can do it from a couple of different areas. You can either do a preview like I just did, or You can hit your Generate Link button, and then you can hit Edge Live. Now, Edge Live, to tell you the truth, is exactly the same thing as the preview screen. We just give it to you in this area in case you've just sent this link out to your borrower, you've got them on the phone, you can immediately go to Edge Live and start altering or highlighting. But as I said, both screens will show exactly the same thing. So when you get into the preview, in order to highlight, and I'm going to clear them all out first, there's a Clear All button down at the very bottom, and you can clear everything out, and this will lop off all the highlighting. But to highlight a field, as long as you're in preview mode, you just left click on it. And as soon as you do that, it highlights. And you can also do an entire column by highlighting the top of a column. You can do individual parts of the graph. And keep in mind, when your borrower is actually looking at the presentation and you're doing it live with them, when you bounce one of these graphics, it'll bounce on their side too. So pretty cool. They get to see the whole, cool little bounce that you see right here on their screen, and it's almost real time. This is actually a lot faster. The Edge Live part of this is where you highlight, where you can pop out more info buttons for them. This happens between 1 and 3 seconds, so it's a little bit faster than when you update a field inside Edge. This is more of a live feeling to it. Now keep in mind though, when you do highlight, when you do pop something out, it's going to do the same thing on their screen as well. So it's a great way to drive the presentation, to guide them through what you want them to look at. But I will tell you that none of this gets recorded with the video. So when you're doing a video, if you're expecting Edge to capture your mouse movements and expecting to capture where you've highlighted and when you've highlighted, it's not going to do that. The video is it's only going to be able to capture what comes through your webcam. And that's just the picture of you smiling and talking and the sound that's coming through the webcam. So when they open up the presentation, they're only going to see that video recording. But I will tell you that whatever you leave highlighted when you close this report, you leave this popped out and highlighted, for instance, and close this report, if you send this link to your borrower without undoing the highlighting or undoing that more info section, I'll show you what it looks like. I'm actually just going to copy this link and I'm going to paste it into a new tab. So this is what it looks like when the borrower clicks on it. Now if you have a video, obviously it'll start playing as well. But you can see that it pops out immediately with that more info out and all your highlights are there. So if you really want to drive their attention towards a specific element in your report first, just make sure to leave the report in that state before you close it. That way when they open it the next time, they're going to see it exactly the way you left it. All right, so it looks like there's a couple more questions here. Dennis's question, is there a way to highlight just the heading without having it highlight the entire column? There is not, actually. It was one or the other for us. We could either do the select all or select one. We went with select all, so there's not a way to do just the header on this. Justice question, why is there no more info tab on the summary section of the rent versus own? This is basically just because they're different presentations. And I agree, we actually have a ticket open to have it added so we can get a more info section here. It's going to require building an additional 3 or 4 pages of print as well though. So that's going to be coming down the pipe a little bit later. For right now, the rent versus own is meant to be a very cursory report. It's not supposed to have so much information that it's going to overwhelm a person. Remember, these are people that have never owned a house. They have no idea how a mortgage works. They're talking to you because you're the professional. But if you inundate them with data, they're just going to lose it. They're going to, obviously it goes into brain freeze mode and you're not going to get anything across. So I would tell you that the rent versus own, when you use this is the baby step. This is the one that you use to get in the door, to get the idea in their head that, hey, wait a minute. You mean I don't have to rent? You mean I can actually do better financially by owning a home and taking a mortgage? Well, yes, absolutely. Let me explain it to you. At that point, you jump over and you generate a total cost for them, and you show them the entire breakdown. Now, the good part about this is that it's very easy to turn this into a total cost. All you have to do is go back inside Edge, select the report, and just select the total cost. All your data entry is exactly the same over here. So all we're going to do is we're going to jump in and prepare the total cost. So I would send them the total cost as a secondary link after I've already gone through the rent versus own with them, just so they can see what it looks like. And when you generate a link here, it's actually different than the one that's generated for the rent versus own. So you can send both links, and one will open the rent versus own, one will open the total cost. So you can see that once we get into the total cost, now we have the more info sections available. Now I can show them all the reinvestment details that I'd like to. I can really isolate what the closing costs are. But remember, you just kind of whet their appetite with the rent versus own. The total cost is, well, as it's described, it's the total cost. This is going to be the full detail of everything that can happen on this loan program. Yvonne's question, can you also highlight a row? Couldn't you do that to highlight headings only? No, unfortunately, when you highlight a heading of any kind, when it's vertical, it's going to do the entire column. Now, rows, you can do individual line items. And the reason we did this is these columns are created dynamically, so it's a lot easier to do a group highlight on an entire column versus an entire row. There's a lot that goes into it. I won't bore you with the minutia on it, but it's pretty tedious to make that happen. If it's something that you guys are definitely interested in, you'd like to see us able to highlight an entire row across rather than just the header here, let us know. We'll look into it. We'll see if we can get that done for you. But as it stands right now, it looks like a lot of development hours for something that only a couple of people have asked for. So if you would like to see that come across, let us know. We'll make it happen for you. Faye's question, can you elaborate more on the tax credit? So the tax credit, we only have one credit in here. We have tax benefit all the way through the report, but the tax credit that we have is actually only available for first-time home buyers, and you can do it either on a rent versus own or a total cost analysis. But here, let me get to it again for you. I just changed this over to be an owner, so hang tight. I'm almost there. Okay, so the tax credit that we show here is, we only show one right now. As we're made aware of others that have become part of your financing options, we'll definitely add them for you. But when we're looking at this one, this is the mortgage credit certificate. Do a little research on this. Ask your lender, find out if you're able to offer this in your state. But it allows a first-time home borrower to write off a certain percentage of the interest that they pay every year up to a cap. And there's really no limit to it, which is kind of cool. They haven't set a time limit for it. Obviously, if they refi or they sell, they're no longer going to be, they won't have this option available to them. But check it out and see if it's something that you might be able to offer. It's a great program for showing the borrower that there's even an additional credit that they can take, not even a tax benefit. This is a credit. So it's actually, instead of just reducing, their taxable income, it's actually going to credit against their tax return. So kind of a different standpoint. Look into it, do a little research on it, find out if you're able to do this. Usually your lender qualifies you for this, so contact your lock desk, they might know, or if you contact the people that actually administer your programs, they're definitely going to know. And actually, Mr. Will had a great point. The MCC credit is also a great opportunity to call their CPA and get the report to them and a referral from the CPA. Anytime you're dealing with any kind of tax advice, always make sure to disclaim yourself. You're not a tax attorney, but you do have tools that allow you to show a glimpse into what they could potentially benefit from a good tax advisor, a good CPA, a good financial planner. So use that to cross-sell. It's a great idea. Anytime you're showing tax benefit, this is a perfect one to pull in your CPA on and say, hey, look, I need you to provide your expertise on this one, because I'm not a tax attorney. I'm not a CPA, but I want to make sure that we get a well-rounded financial portfolio for this new first-time home buyer. All right. Glenn's question, why is the tax benefit and principal payment reduction for the FHA versus the conventional so much higher on the report? That might have been because I altered some of the fields in the analysis screen, Glenn, but let me check it out real quick. And you can see that just because I've made other alterations by selecting, I've actually got a rent and a current mortgage. That's kind of cool. But it's because I made this one a total cost analysis after I made it a rent report. So I kind of defeated the rent versus own by jumping back and forth between it. But when we're looking at the tax benefit here, and I'll explain exactly what the tax benefit, if you guys want the written verbiage on how the tax benefit is calculated, send us an email over at support@mortgagecoach.com. But what we do is we take the interest, the MI, the property tax, we take those three, add them together, and multiply them by the decimal rating of their tax bracket. So for instance, a 25% tax bracket, I'm going to take 0.25, I'm going to multiply that by the monthly property tax, I'm going to take 0.25, multiply it by the monthly interest. I'm going to take 0.25, multiply it by the monthly mortgage insurance, and then I'm going to add those figures together for a total tax benefit per month. Now, the same thing applies when you're going over the 60-month area. It's just instead of taking the individual monthly amount, we're taking the cumulative amounts. So the cumulative interest multiplied by the tax bracket, cumulative MI. Now remember, this FHA loan is paying a lot more MI, and it's actually ending up paying roughly the same amount of interest. It's a little bit lower, but it's a lot more MI. So they're going to get an additional tax benefit on that mortgage insurance that they're able to write off. So that's why we're seeing a greater tax benefit over here versus what we're seeing on the conventional loan. Now the conventional loan also, they're coming in with a little bit more money, so they've got a little bit lower loan amount, which means that's enough to offset this rate difference between the two programs. So the interest they're paying on this conventional is actually less than what they're paying on the FHA. All right, so hopefully that helps, Glenn. If you need a little bit more clarification on that, let me know. Ken's question, is it possible to align the closing cost sequence to what is similar to the fees worksheet? You can, Ken, but you got to do it manually. So what you would do is when you're creating your fee templates, you go into your settings area here, and you're going to go to fee templates, and you can create these in any order you'd like. And I would tell you that take a look at one of your fee worksheets from a loan that you just closed, and start just inputting the names of the fees. You don't necessarily have to put the dollar amounts. If you know that they're static dollar amounts, go for it. But just input the names of the fees in the order you'd like them to appear, and save that as a template. That way, when you go to pull in the template, you know it's going to be in the same order as what your fee worksheet is showing, and it's going to make a lot more sense to you when you're tabbing down and just filling out the fees. But as we discussed earlier, there's no way to reorder the fees. So if you wanted them in a different order after you've already entered them, you're going to have to delete fees and then re-add them back in. Okay. Jim's question, what is the easiest way to show them their rent versus the actual PITI for comparison of their monthly cash flow? That would be when you go into the rent versus own. It's actually listed right here, and I don't have this highlightable. Let me produce a rent versus own real quick from this presentation. Got to make some adjustments here because I had changed a few things inside. So I'm going to toggle this back over to renter. And let me just generate a preview for you, and I'll show you what that looks like. So the graphics won't show just the net cash flow difference. The graphics are going to show the difference in the net monthly payments as described before. But you can show them physically on your report. If you just want to isolate the total payment versus the PITI payment here, you can see that our PITI payments are indeed a little bit higher than what they're paying for rent. Now this is not going to give us a long-term cash flow, but pretty easy to multiply that out. You could even put that in the notes section here. This would be a great use of the notes section, especially because it's tied to the payment. You can let them know that your PITI payment is $200 more than your rent payment, but when you apply the tax benefit and the principal that you're paying, your net payment is $400 less, actually $600 less in this case. So it's a good way to draw their attention to what these figures are, and then of course what the net payments actually represent. So I might actually indicate highlighting not only the net payment, but the full PITI payment as well. All right. And Janice's question, what is the net monthly savings on the rent versus own? The net monthly savings on the rent versus own is the difference between these net monthly payments. And those are PITI minus tax benefit and principal pay. That's how we get the net monthly payment. And then the difference between those would be your net monthly savings. So that's these figures being subtracted out. So we have $529 is our difference between our net mortgage payment on the FHA versus our rent payment, and so on. And Tom's question, is this being recorded so I can view it again? Absolutely, Tom. I do record every single one of these. This is going to be located in our coaching call archive. You can always see the most recent Q&A call by clicking the link right here. To get to the coaching call archive, just go to mortgagecoach.com, hover your mouse over Community, and choose Coaching Call Archive. And you can see that lately I've actually started posting these QA sessions in line with the coaching calls. So I'm not overwriting them each time. So the reason I'm doing this is because we're covering specific topics rather than just opening it up for questions. So like today, we covered the rent versus own in full detail. So I am going to post this as the last presentation in the August category here. You'll see a QA session for rent versus own. I should have that up. It takes about an hour and a half to convert, but I'll definitely have this up, I would say, within 2 or 3 hours today, and it should be available for viewing at that point. But these also get published to our YouTube page. That's where all these link to. So if you want to get notified immediately when it's published, go to YouTube, and it's free to set up a YouTube account, by the way. But go to YouTube and type in youtube.com/mortgage coach. And you can actually choose to follow or choose to watch it. What's called a subscription. It's a free thing, obviously. You're never going to pay money for anything on YouTube. Just make sure that when you do a subscription, you have notification preferences that you can set. So you can choose to be notified when we push out a new video of any kind. And those involve coaching calls, and those also involve our QA calls and any forward-facing webinars that we're doing as well. Janice's question before we go. I know you asked this earlier, Janet. Sorry, I glossed over it. She's asking, is there a way to show biweekly mortgage payments and show the benefits? Now, there isn't a way to show biweekly payments, and I'll show you why. Right now, and if we were to look at a total cost, this will make more sense. So you'll notice that we have these fields here have specific labels that apply to all of them. So things like the payment here is a pity payment on a monthly scale. If we were to try and incorporate the biweekly payment, we need an additional label for this, and it's just not possible in the format we've got it. Now, that said, there is a way to work around a biweekly payment. And if you send a note over to support, we have it written up for you, and we can get it to you. But basically what you're going to do is you're going to find the total payments per year on the monthly versus the total payments per year on the biweekly schedule. And you're going to take the difference and divide it by 12 and apply that as a principal reduction every month as a biweekly. So what effectively is happening is you're still accounting for the difference in payments, and you're escalating the loan program by the amount of that difference. But we have it written out for you. We can definitely get you the full detail on that one. It's not difficult to do once you've done it once or twice. It's just a little hairy to try and describe verbally. But send us a note and we'll get that to you. All right, guys, so it's 10:04 right now. I think I'm going to go ahead and call it for the day. You guys have been awesome, great questions, and definitely make sure to join us each week. I'll try and get new and fresh topics, but if you ever have ideas for something you'd like to see covered, let us know over at support. Shoot a quick note over to support@mortgagecoach.com and say, hey, I want you to cover a total cost analysis for XYZ, whatever. But let us know what you like covered. We'll make it one of our posted topics, and we'll make sure you get covered on it. With that said, guys, thanks. Have a wonderful day. Again, thanks for joining me, and hope to see you all next week. Bye-bye.